Commonly asked of me is, do I have any free samples? And unfortunately, I don't have any free samples here today, but if you want to come up afterwards, I'll show you one of the things that we made at the United States Mint, which was gold bullion. So this is one of our gold bullion coins. It's 1 ounce of gold, worth $1,200 by today. It's not a free sample, but if you have never held an ounce of gold in your hand, you ought to give yourself the pleasure of doing that at the session and come up afterwards, and I'm happy to share this with you so you can enjoy it. But we do have free samples of another type. On your chair, you'll see a black billet, and when you take a look at it, it's from a company called Circle, and they have sponsored this panel by giving everyone here the opportunity to get $5 of free Bitcoin just by downloading Circle's wallet, and then you can use your smartphone to take a picture of the QR code and automatically get $5 of Bitcoin deposited in your wallet. So I don't think any other panel has that benefit. So congratulations on coming to the right place. Before we start, I want to do a quick survey. How many in this room are familiar with Bitcoin? Do you know what Bitcoin is? Raise your hand. All right. Of those who've raised their hands, how many of you do you think you could explain Bitcoin to your parents in a way that they could understand it? All right. And then finally, raise your hands if you have an opinion on whether or not you think Bitcoin is consistent with conservative principles or consistent with liberal principles. I'm not saying either one, but if you know enough about what Bitcoin does to have an opinion, raise your hand. Okay, we're going to do the same survey after we get done to see if we were able to move any minds on this. So, as part of our panel today, we have two very distinguished speakers. Our first panelist is Jinyoung Englund. She is head of communications and business development for the Bitcoin Foundation. So the Bitcoin Foundation is Bitcoin's kind of association of sorts, and they're in charge of the technology and updating whatever upgrades to the software that are needed. She also worked for former Secretary of Labor Elaine Chao, as well as she's worked on the Hill. So we're very pleased to have Jinyoung join our panel. And our second panelist is Terry Schilling, who's the executive director of the American Principles Project. And he's worked for Congressman Chris Smith, who is a Republican from New Jersey, as well as Senator Sam Brownback during his time in the Senate when he was from Kansas before he became governor. And Terry follows these issues very much, especially monetary policy, so we'll get multiple angles on what Bitcoin is. So without further ado, I will ask a couple questions to the panel to get us going, and hopefully they'll get your creative juices going. And after the moderator's questions, we'll open it up to any questions that you might have of the panelists, and then the last few minutes we'll close with some summary slides. So first question I have for our panelists is, in as simple of a way that you can explain it, tell me, what is Bitcoin?
I'll defer to you on that one.
So as Ed mentioned, I represent the Bitcoin Foundation, though today I'm here on my own accord. Oh, is this not working? Hello, better? Sorry. So as Ed mentioned, I work for the Bitcoin Foundation. We're the trade association for the industry, though today I'm here on my own accord. And I think the easiest way to explain Bitcoin is the ability to move value over the internet. And that has never been done before. People say, well, we do that with credit cards. You don't really, because when you swipe your credit card, what you're doing is authorizing that bank or credit card company to record your transaction. When you literally move a Bitcoin across the internet, you're moving that value, and it's automatically being recorded, therefore removing the middleman. It's kind of like email. Back in the day, you used to send someone a letter with the postman. Now, thanks to encryption technology, you're able to send someone a message around the world instantaneously using email.
Wait, Terry?
Yeah, I would just like to add on to that, that I think that one of the larger issues with Bitcoin is that it's a symptom of a larger problem. So Bitcoin, I believe, was created due to poor monetary policy coming out of the Federal Reserve. The private sector is looking for a better system, and it's looking to improve monetary policy itself. And so that's I think the not a bigger issue, but I just think it's a symptom of the current problems that we're facing with the dollar and with currencies across the globe.
And to add my 2 cents worth, which I can as Mint Director, and by the way, 2 cents is not worth 2 cents. It costs us 2 cents to make a penny, so I'm actually giving you 4 cents worth of insight here. And that is, Bitcoin is, in essence, a technology. And that technology does 2 things really well. One is it makes payment systems much more efficient because you're using the internet instead of proprietary electronic systems to send money around the world. Second, it works as a currency. It works as a unit of value that is created by the private sector to, in essence, compete against the government monopoly of creating money. So those are the 2 essential functions of Bitcoin. One is to be used as a more efficient payment system, and secondly, to be used as a currency or a unit of value.
Well, and to add to that, so those are the current utilities of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's only 6 years old. And because it's a technology, it's a source code. Some of you guys were around when the internet was first introduced. And when the internet was first introduced, back then, no one fathomed that you could invent something like Facebook on the internet, or that you could invent something like YouTube or Twitter on the internet, right? We were just trying to figure out how to send messages in an efficient and easy way. So the same thing with Bitcoin. So imagine you have a chocolate chip cookie recipe, right? You have your basics, your flour, butter, milk, sugar. But depending on if you have the skills to code, depending on what else you add to the original source code, that is the Bitcoin protocol, you can invent something like smart contracts. You can invent something like real asset transfers. You can even invent blockchain voting. So think of Bitcoin, as Ed says, as a technology, but we're only 6 years in, so the possibilities are still endless.
Yep. And for those of you who want to speak about this, Bitcoin as a technology, as a payment system, as well as currency is Bitcoin 1.0. And Bitcoin 2.0 is then taking that technology and finding other uses for it. So with that, that leads into my second question, and that is, what is Bitcoin's positive potential? So what ways can Bitcoin be used to make things better?
I'll let you start first.
So one of the reasons why I'm personally really excited about Bitcoin is I used to live and work in Mozambique, working with the poor, with orphans and widows. And one of the challenges that the widows that we worked with had was being able to accumulate wealth. They didn't earn a lot of money, but they had no way of safely storing their money and no way of safely growing that, because you're living in a hut, no electricity, middle of nowhere, have no access to a bank. A bank won't even bank you because you earn maybe less than $2 a day. And so how do you help people like that get access to the financial system? Bitcoin provides that answer. So mobile payments, the ability to pay using your mobile phone, whether it's a smartphone or a dumb phone, is a $17 trillion industry. And banks and credit card companies have actually invested money in their research and development to try to figure out how can we send secure payments efficiently over the internet. And the inventor of Bitcoin beat them to the punch. And so just think about that. If you're a widow living in the middle of Africa and you want to pay your child's tuition, in the capital city, let's say you're in Kenya, but you need to spend money just to get to the city to pay the teacher for the tuition, what if you could just do that using your mobile phone? That opens up the financial banking market to over 2 billion people who currently have zero access to the financial system. And that's one of the major positive aspects of Bitcoin that we're excited about.
I think that one of the other major benefits to Bitcoin is it is free from manipulation by a central bank, such as the current system that we have with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve's monetary policy literally determines the value of the dollar. So if they raise interest rates, it creates a stronger dollar. If they lower them, it creates a weaker dollar. With Bitcoin, its value is determined by the free market. Now, some people are a little worried about that. Others are more embracing of it because it can't be manipulated. But one of the things that I think makes Bitcoin most appealing is that the reason it's gaining traction is because of the manipulations from the Federal Reserve. So people today are seeing their housing value or their housing prices increase. They're seeing their food increase. They're seeing their healthcare costs increase. Across the board, they're seeing price increases, and they're seeing their wages stagnant. Some people have figured out that this is coming from bad monetary policy. Others haven't. But what Bitcoin does is it helps to take the manipulation of our dollar out of the hands of central economic planners, which is something that I think is groundbreaking.
From my perspective, working at the United States Mint, seeing how financial systems work, seeing how we regulate those financial systems, one of the big problems with our struggling economy right now is the cost of financial transactions. Because every time you go and spend money at a restaurant and you pay with a credit card, that restaurant is charged a fee by that credit card company that ranges anywhere from 1% to 3%, or with American Express, there's a standard minimum swipe fee of $2 every time you swipe it, which is why a lot of businesses don't accept American Express, because if you sell a $10 object of which you make, say, 10% profit, a dollar profit, and then you have to pay $2 to American Express to get the payment, you're losing money. With Bitcoin, by using Bitcoin, again, because it uses the internet for that transaction instead of a proprietary system, the reason why you have to pay the credit card company is they built the highway that transaction has to go through, and therefore they can charge everyone, every business using that highway, a toll, in essence, to use that highway to transact that financial transaction. But with Bitcoin, you use the internet much in the same way as, for example, American Online figured out a way to send emails through, but you had to pay $20 a month to subscribe to American Online. Google then figured out how to do it for $0. You can also look at phones. I mean, I get charged $70 a month from Verizon just to be able to send emails through my phone. Whereas then Skype has figured out how to do phone calls for $0 because it uses the internet, which is a lot cheaper to use than these proprietary systems. And that's one of the things we can do to boost the economy. If you want a private sector solution that does not require government intervention to boost the economy, you would pay more in Bitcoin because then more profit would then end up going to the business, which helps the business. But you also benefit from it because Bitcoin is a technology, and therefore that technology uses the most advanced encryption, cryptography, so that it's almost impossible to break that particular transaction. And instead of a central focal point like credit cards, whereas if you hack into that node, you can steal all that information. A hacker has to basically hack into each individual transaction, which all has different codes in order to steal the money. It's just not cost efficient for criminals to do it that way. And so by using Bitcoin, not only do you help the economy, but you protect your own personal information. Great. Let's go on to, I have at least one more question, maybe two more questions, then we'll open it up. So we talked about some of the positive potential. What are some of the risks around Bitcoin? Terry mentioned a little bit in that the market determines the price.
Yeah, so I would say that obviously the volatility, Bitcoin is still in its infancy compared to widely accepted payments such as the dollar or such as gold and silver. But it's got a lot of potential still. But so it's been the value of Bitcoin has been volatile over the past 6 years, but that will probably end up sorting itself out, and I can let Jinyoung speak more to that. I would say that Even still, though, with its volatility, the U.S. dollar isn't any better. If you look at what the Federal Reserve has done since President Nixon in 1971 got us off of the gold standard, the value of the dollar is 17 cents of what it is, of what it was in 1971. You know, President Nixon said to us, a dollar today will still be worth a dollar tomorrow. Well, that's obviously not true. That's right up there with Bill Clinton's "I did not have sex with this woman," or Barack Obama's "You can keep your health care plan if you like your health care plan." Even though it's been volatile and it isn't widely accepted or recognized yet as a form of payment, I still see bigger problems with the U.S. dollar as it sees fit.
Oh, I agree with Terry. I mean, we always tell people, don't buy more Bitcoin than you're willing to lose, right? We're only 6 years in. It's a brand new technology. The volatility over time, I mean, what makes money, right, is widespread acceptance and a trust in the system. So until you hit a certain percentage of acceptance, then that volatility is going to continue to exist. But the same with the US dollar. I mean, your money is only as good as how strong your government is. And governments rise and fall. We see that throughout history. I believe America is one of the greatest nations in the world, but poor stewardship of our government could lead to a crisis like we're seeing in Greece, like we're seeing in Cyprus, like we have been seeing for the past 2 generations in Argentina. It's just good to keep your options open and to be aware of your other options.
Yep. And as a former financial regulator, I would say one of the big concerns within that financial regulatory community is the abuse of Bitcoin, meaning that when in the past, if you needed to do an illegal transaction, you just paid cash for it. But then to carry around $1,200 of cash in bills versus, so if you do a big transaction, $250,000, that's a lot of suitcases of bills. And so that's why people end up using, gold, was that you could have a lot more value in a lot smaller package, right? But then as inflation goes up, it takes a lot more money to buy a surface-to-air missile today than it did, 20 years ago. And so therefore now you need a lot more gold, and the big truck, armored carrier would be a little suspicious. So then when you can fit $250,000 worth of Bitcoin on your phone and basically beam it from one phone to another phone, that makes illegal transactions much more efficient. And it wouldn't matter if I did $10, $250,000, or $2.5 billion. I just have to carry my phone around with me.
At the same time, you leave a digital footprint. And so from a
Yes.
law enforcement perspective, it's actually money still is the number one choice for money laundering, like the US dollar.
Yes.
But because with Bitcoin, you leave a digital footprint. As long as our law enforcement officials and financial regulators are educated on the technology, if you're a criminal that uses Bitcoin, you'd have to be pretty stupid.
Yes. So recently there was a case where there's basically the eBay of bad stuff called Silk Road. And the feds ended up monitoring that, and there were a lot of Bitcoin transactions, and they ended up shutting it down. But they were able to go after the bad guys because one of the positives of Bitcoin is everything goes on a public ledger. And so you may have, it's not a completely anonymous transaction, it's pseudonymous. We know what code owns this Bitcoin, and it transferred hands from this to this. So you can begin monitoring large volumes and figure out who's doing the bad stuff and then go after those people. And the second point that I would also say as a regulator is people say, okay, Bitcoin was used on Silk Road to buy bad stuff, and therefore we should ban Bitcoin. Well, as Jinyoung said, $1.5 billion have been stolen from hackers, but yet no one's saying let's ban banks and ban cash because but people are using that for bad stuff. And so this is basically, from a moral perspective, morally neutral. It's just a transfer of value. How it's used and how it's policed is a different issue. But Bitcoin itself is, I believe, amoral. So with talking about the risks, then that leads into my next question, and that is, this was born in the marketplace, but does the federal government have any role in regulating or any intervention to either help Bitcoin along or to prevent Bitcoin's progress?
I'll let you start off with that one.
So governments like their money, right? They like to retain the power to print money, and so do banks. If you're a smart businessman, you want to retain that ability. However, Bitcoin is something we call permissionless innovation, right? It's interesting because Bitcoin is kind of like the Silicon Valley startup guy coming head to head with Wall Street. And it's permissionless innovation in that it literally was created by the people for the people. So there is no central government, there's no central Federal Reserve like we have in our monetary system. And so Bitcoin will only continue to be as useful as people want to use it. And that's a really interesting concept, right? Whereas with fiat currencies, they're tied to the success of a government. But Bitcoin, because it was created by the people and its utility is maintained by people, the government can try to own it, but there's no way, because even to affect changes to the Bitcoin Core protocol, you have to have something called consensus. So there are consensus. So because Bitcoin is a code, the foundation, we hold 2 of the 5 keys to make changes to the protocol. But we don't have direct influence on what changes are made. Our chief scientist and the core maintainer, they work with a network of over 200 developers around the world. And they decide collectively, these are the changes that we're going to affect. And so it's kind of like a germ or a disease, right? If 100,000 people all have the germ, yes, I understand. But if 100,000 people have this disease, it's going to be much harder for you to shut it down. But if that disease is contained in one area, then you can shut it down because it's centralized. Bitcoin is completely distributed. So government intervention is going to be very difficult. Other developers in the community, one that is funded by a Bitcoin company and another one that's funded by a for-profit think tank for the Bitcoin community. And those keys, so Satoshi Nakamoto is the founder, and when Satoshi exited the scene, he handed the keys to the foundation's chief scientist, Gavin Andreessen, and Gavin made other keys and spread out the power, distributed the power, so that, again, it's led by consensus, and he wanted to maintain that.
Terry?
When I thought, we got these questions in advance, and when I was thinking about this, what kept ringing in my head was what President Reagan said about the government's view of the economy. He said, government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. I'd prefer the government just let them exist. I don't want them to help support them. I don't want them to regulate them. And I don't think the Bitcoin folks would prefer that they regulate them either. So I think that the government should probably just let it exist and keep it around.
Well, so there will be some regulations, especially when it comes to Bitcoin being used in financial services, right? But it won't be regulations placed on the protocol. It will be regulations that companies in the space have to comply with. So, for example, in the case of the Silk Road, and in the case of criminal activity, if Bitcoin is being moved, who would you go to get that information and to catch those criminals? If the government were to, say, regulate Bitcoin companies in this space, whether exchanges or wallets, and say, you have to keep customer data so that if we see this suspicious address funneling $1 million to this specific organization, we'd like to know who owns that wallet. And so there is a degree of, everything in moderation, right? So in order to protect people against bad actors, the government may try to regulate Bitcoin companies, but it can't regulate the protocol.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good answer. And that leads me to the last question before we open it up to questions from our group here, and that is, why should conservatives care about Bitcoin?
I think that conservatives should care about Bitcoin because I'll get back to my first point, in that it's a symptom of poor monetary policy coming out of the Federal Reserve. Conservatives should, I don't know if they should embrace it or reject it. I guess they shouldn't, as Jinyoung said earlier, you probably shouldn't switch all of your money over to Bitcoin right now. But should they try it out? Sure. I guess, yeah, so it gets back to the whole problem with the Federal Reserve and how they're manipulating our markets and our entire economy. Steve Forbes wrote a book recently called Money, How the Destruction of the Dollar Threatens the Global Economy and What We Can Do About It. And in it, he makes a central point, and he says that you can get it right on tax policy, on trade, on budget, on regulations, on healthcare, but if you don't get the money right, it's all for nothing. And I think that Bitcoin is trying to answer this problem that we have with our current dollar. And so that's why I think it's intriguing, it's caught my interest, and I think it should catch your guys' interest as well.
Well, and for me, I think as conservatives, we are the party of entrepreneurs, and we are the party of small businesses, and we are the party of innovation and market-based solutions for improving lives. How we let someone else define who we are and what we believe, I think is a result of us not speaking up and being educated on new technologies like Bitcoin. So do I think that conservatives should at least be educated and engaged? I absolutely do. And so definitely, Circle was so kind to give everyone here $5 worth of Bitcoin. Download the app, try it out, buy something on Expedia or at a coffee shop or overstock.com. Try it out and see how easy it is.
So, as a former director of the Mint and senior Treasury official, and a conservative, I come at this from this angle. Conservatives ought to be concerned about big government. And secondly, conservatives don't like monopolies. We like how the market works. It's really bad when government has a monopoly, when you put those two together, and government has a monopoly on printing money. And they also have a responsibility to do that prudently in the public interest, which in the past 3 years they have not. And so given that, Bitcoin I view as a private sector solution, a free market solution to that government monopoly. We don't have to use it. It's optional, and if we figure out that it works well for us in this kind of transaction, then it's going to gain momentum and provide direct competition to the government monopoly. And that's why conservatives ought to care about this, is that we don't like monopolies or big government, especially government monopolies. And this is one way that we can make a statement, let alone use it because it has utility to us. And so, given that, it's the market that will determine whether or not this is a successful initiative. So with that, we have about 10 or 15 minutes of questions. So I'm going to open it up to the floor. Yes, ma'am.
What is the intrinsic value of a Bitcoin? I came in late, and you may have covered that. And also, who controls the supply?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'll let my panelists take the first crack at that.
So the value of a Bitcoin. So when we're talking about Bitcoin, we have to clarify, are we talking about the technology, the protocol, or Bitcoin in its utility as a currency? So the value of the protocol, the technology, currently the world's top venture capitalists in the world have invested over $500 million into the space to build it out. Literally, if you missed the internet, we're back at it. And if you're here for Bitcoin and you get it, then it's like being at the beginning of the internet. So the technology, the valuation comes from the investors that are investing and entrepreneurs that are building. Bitcoin as a currency, the price per Bitcoin is determined by the market. So again, because it's created by the people, it exists because people use it and they want it. The current, if you go to CoinDesk, Bitcoin.com. It's a Bitcoin news publication. What they've done is they've created a data aggregating tool where they pull from all the exchanges around the world what people are buying and selling Bitcoin for. And you can get like an average daily price for that. And then the second part of her question was
who determines the limit?
okay, so the creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, this is what's so brilliant and genius about Bitcoin, right? Because he solved the double spend problem. He solved the problem of how do I make sure if I send Alex $10 that I don't send that same $10 to Ed, right? And the designer of Bitcoin, he wrote it in the source code that every time I move a Bitcoin, it's recorded on a public ledger. It's called the blockchain. And so there's a proof of work that was transitioned. He also wrote into the source code that only 21 million Bitcoins will ever be in existence. And that 21 million is distributed over time based on a mathematical equation. So it's consistently distributed over time. We think that 21 millionth Bitcoin will be mined in 2140. It's the current math. But each Bitcoin has infinite indivisibility. So right now, Bitcoin can be chopped down to the 8th decimal point. So I can send you 0.00001 Bitcoin, right? But as popularity grows and it becomes more adopted into mainstream, the developers that hold the keys, we can make changes like adding another decimal point.
Okay. Terry, do you want to add to that?
No, I think she answered it.
Okay, good. And I think I want to get at your core issue here, and that is, gosh, it's nothing. It's no intrinsic value. So why should we embrace that as conservatives, right? I mean, shouldn't we embrace something like gold, which has value to it? Well, conservatives embrace dollars, and dollars have no intrinsic value to it. So if you take a look at the history of money, just quickly, it's gone from a commodity-based bartering, where you bartered wheat for salmon, to precious metal, to precious metal proxy, right? You can trade the bill in for 1 ounce of silver, to now what's called fiat currency. A dollar bill is not worth anything. It's only worth $1 because the government tells you it's worth $1. And you legally have to accept it as $1, or you can violate the law. That's why it's called legal tender and fiat currency. It's government fiat that determines the value. So if you're a conservative, you would take a look and say, is it more conservative to have the government dictate what value is, or is it more conservative to have the free market figure out what the value is? And so I lean toward the Bitcoin because I think the markets are much more efficient at determining the value than the government is. Yes, sir, in the back.
I just downloaded that app, put $5 in that circle of Bitcoin.
Okay.
So if I understand this, the fact that the value of Bitcoin adjusts with the market at the end of the month. So is it possible that now this is showing in US dollars, when I look at my account, that 2 days from now it might be $4.98, or it might be $5.25, and that balances in US dollars and adjusts the value wherever the market conditions are. And so if that is the case, and a little bit different than a very folksy explanation of this, this is like a Starbucks card, where really you're preloading some value in there and be spent elsewhere, where in the case of Starbucks, specifically at Starbucks, only just allows you to utilize that Bitcoin anywhere that people will accept.
Right, so the Circle app, so congratulations for downloading it. It's a digital wallet, right? It's like a bank account on your phone. And you're right, your $5 today could be worth $4 later this afternoon, or it could be worth $10 tomorrow. But that's why it's experimental. We're only 6 years in, right? The volatility will go down over time, but also what we'll start seeing are Bitcoin-based ecosystems, right? Where you will transact using the Bitcoin network to send money, to and from places, and therefore paying 0 to 1% transaction fees, but you'll see it in US dollars. And so, but that is years still in the making, and the investors and entrepreneurs are building that system out.
Yeah. And by the way, I wouldn't let the volatility discourage you from using Bitcoin, because the government's solution to that, to getting rid of the volatility, was to get rid of any value in our currency whatsoever. So up until 1964, a quarter had 25 cents of silver in it. But then with fluctuating commodity prices, because everybody's getting off the gold and silver standards, silver was worth X amount an ounce one day, Y an ounce the other day. And so therefore, a quarter sometimes had 22 cents of silver in it, and sometimes it had 28 cents worth of silver in it. So the government decided to go to clad coins in 1964 to make the coins well beneath have the metal value of the coin well beneath the face value of the coin, so they wouldn't have to deal with the problem. So in essence, the currency that we use is basically useless tokens that are just supported by confidence in the federal government's ability to back it up. Yes, over there.
What would you say to people who are really skeptical of Bitcoin do the Mt. Gox situation, where half the people lost $1 million worth of Bitcoins, and unlike a bank where they have agency, they're insured, those people were out of their money.
So for those that are unfamiliar with Mt. Gox was one of the Bitcoin companies in the space. They were an exchange. So an exchange is where you can buy and sell Bitcoins. They were based in Japan. And what happened was Mt. Gox went bankrupt, and all the coins that they were holding are missing, or we don't really know. So what would we say to someone who is skeptical because of news like that? Well, I would remind you, Bitcoin is experimental. And I would remind you that, if you're going to work with a Bitcoin company, whether it's using their wallet services or using their remittance services or using their exchange services, do your homework. Because not everyone is cut out to be a businessman. Not everyone knows how to build a business. And so do your homework. Look to see if they're venture funded. Look to see who's on their board of directors. Look to see who are their venture capitalists and where they're getting their advice from. Look to see, are they legally compliant? And I think as a customer, the due diligence is on us to do the research.
Yeah. And I would bring up two thoughts on that. First of all, people didn't trash the internet because pets.com went out of business, right? I mean, that was the first generation of people trying to figure out online buying. And now it's, eBay is years beyond that. Mt. Gox was the first generation. And succeeding generations have gotten much more security and much more tighter in their banking and savings procedures. Second, just because the bank got robbed, does that mean you want to ban cash? That's in essence what you're saying about Mt. Gox. Just because Mt. Gox was robbed, then should we get rid of Bitcoin? Well, banks get robbed all the time, but people aren't saying, let's get rid of the dollar bill. You have to take a look at the security of the bank itself. And we as conservatives believe that the customer ought to be aware, right? They ought to do their research and not rely on the government to tell them where they can buy and where they can't buy.
So, for example, Circle, the company that sponsored the $5 of Bitcoin, they're backed by Excel Partners. And for some of you who are familiar with venture capitalists, Excel Partners, Jim Breyer, he was one of the first investors in Facebook. So it's very easy to Google and find who are their venture capitalists, who are their advisors, who's on their board. And I would recommend everyone to do that research before you commit to a company.
All right, other questions? Let's go, yes, sir.
I studied the protocol a little bit. The gentleman here talked a lot about, what happened with Mt. Gox, and that's all great. We all know that we have that physical presence, dollar, gold, silver, diamond, and you accept that value, that's great. So now let's talk a little bit about these different people who are playing in there that may be my exchange, right? I have not done the research on that. I know as an IT person that if somebody has a real good cloud service there, hey, maybe if their site A goes down, they have so many of it, I know that I'm always going to have access to my file. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of, I guess I'll call it confidence, reliability?
Like storage and security?
Yes, exactly. Because, hey, I know if I go to my safety deposit box, hey, I may find some money there. Or if grandma dies, I find that. I can go and take that money that she had from 30 years ago, and maybe that's $10,000 and go turn it in. But digitally, hey, if I don't have digital access to it, it's gone.
Right.
The question, not just for the now currency, but 5-10 years from now.
So if you don't have coding experience, I don't recommend you to try to invent your own wallet. I would recommend you go with a company that, again, has their ducks in a row in terms of building a very well-run business. So there are some companies that, so for example, Coinbase is a company based out of San Francisco. One of their venture capitalists is Mark Andreessen, one of the early pioneers of the internet. Coinbase, they're based out of San Francisco. And they are one of the first Bitcoin companies to provide what's called cold storage. So most people will keep some, not all your Bitcoins, in your phone, like how some of you keep cash in your wallet. The majority of your finances are saved in safety deposit box or savings accounts with banks, correct? And so same with Coinbase, you have the option now to carry Bitcoins on your digital wallet, on your mobile phone, or you could put it in their vault, which is cold storage, which basically they take the Bitcoins offline and put it in cold storage in secret places around the world. And so, let's say and Coinbase is one of the few companies that also provide a guarantee that if their system gets hacked, if they don't do their due diligence and provide security, that they will replace your Bitcoin. So again, you want to look for companies like that, right?
Good. Other questions? Yes, sir.
What timeline, if any, is there for Bitcoin's adaptability on a widespread market? For example, a company goes, when they hire an employee, the employee can choose to be paid in Bitcoin. And what timeline is there for, again, volatility to settle down, or is it expected to settle down?
Well, so most tech companies, it takes minimum 10 years, maybe 20, for it to hit what we call mainstream acceptance. We're only 6 years into Bitcoin, so we are in the early adapters. So the fact that you're in this room and now you know a little bit about Bitcoin puts you in that category, especially if you have Bitcoin on your wallet. And early adapters, right? I mean, you're like Mark Andreessen with the internet. Most people don't understand Bitcoin, they don't use it, they're afraid of it. But because you're in that early adopter category, it would probably take another 5, 10, 15 years before we hit that peak of mainstream acceptance.
Terry?
Yeah, so I would just add that while it's so at the American Principles Project, we've got a monetary policy action arm, and so in the meantime, while it's taking time for there to be security and it to hit its peak for Bitcoin, I'm referring to. American Principles Project supports the gold standard and backing our dollars, again, by gold to keep the dollar worth a dollar. So I think that we can take steps through the government, through the Federal Reserve, to do that and to ensure the value of the dollar as well in the meantime while they're getting things ready.
All right, so it is 3 o'clock. We've run out of time. Our panelists will be available in the hallway if you have any additional questions. As a new part of CPAC, we're closing each panel with a summary. And so this is the quick summary. What we learned is that Bitcoin is a currency and a technology. That Bitcoin currency is a free market alternative to the government monopoly of money. Bitcoin is closer to gold than fiat currency. Bitcoin technology reduces financial transaction costs and increases competition, and Bitcoin is a private sector solution to the world's unbanked. If you want to find out more, go to bitcoin.org, which is the website of the Bitcoin Foundation.
The Bitcoin Foundation is bitcoinfoundation.org. Bitcoin.org is a community site that we sponsor that will give you more information about wallets and exchanges and all of that.
It's basically 101,
Yes.
and it's really easy to go through. Second, I think Bitcoin on Wikipedia has a bit more detailed information that's fairly accurate. Third, there are 2 books that have recently been published. The first one, The Age of Cryptocurrency, How Bitcoin and Digital Money Are Changing the Global Economic Order, written by 2 friends of mine who are the Wall Street Journal reporters that specialize in digital currencies. And they wrote really a great objective book that's extremely readable. And plus, I wrote the blurb on the back, so please buy it. Second is Bitcoin and Gold, which is coming out very soon. It's the information theory of money. And for those of you who remember George Gilder, if you have gray hair like I do, George Gilder and Milton Friedman inspired Ronald Reagan in his supply side economics. And so George Gilder is a free market hero who now has turned into a technological futurist, and he has fully embraced Bitcoin as the modern era's version of gold. And his inspiration for his book was based on a monograph that Terry's organization sponsored.
That's right.
And so Terry ended up, his group was the seed that ended up birthing this book. So those two books are great books. You should be looking for them. And then finally, how do we motivate you to take action? Buy Bitcoin. You don't have to buy Bitcoin. If you came in late, this is your certificate to get $5 of free Bitcoin. Just download Circle's wallet and then take a picture of the QR code and you get $5 worth of Bitcoin. Second, you don't need a wallet because you have Circle's wallet. Third, spend Bitcoin. There's 60,000 retailers that accept Bitcoin, including Expedia and Overstocks.com. Fourth, if you're a business, start accepting Bitcoin at your business and start saving money from those credit card fees. And number 5, ask your favorite charity or nonprofit to accept Bitcoin. Whenever I give, and you want to give at the charity's event, you have to stand in a long line to give them credit card information. Here, people can walk around with a t-shirt with the QR code, walk up with your wallet, take a picture of the QR code, transfer the money to them, you're done. And you can go on having fun for the rest of the evening. So with that, thank you very much for attending our panel today. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of CPAC.